All right. Hey, what's up and welcome. We are live and we're just gonna jump right into it. So I've been wanting to put more world building content on the stream and guess what? That's what we're doing today. So if you're here, you already know why you're here. You click the video because there are 5 world building tips you need to consider. And I wanted to make this video because, as you guys have seen on my channel already, I've already put out some world building content. It's something that's very fun for me and something that other people enjoy watching. And I guess when you need tips on the subject, hey, at least we'll have a wealth of videos for people to turn to. So I really wanted to dive in at the start of world building because my other videos are just kind of about random things that might that you might have to consider while you've already been going through the process somewhat. But for people who have never been through the process of world building, I wanted to start at the not the very start, but just as you're dipping your toes in there. So where this advice is going to come in handy is after you've already asked yourself the major basic yes or no starting questions of world building. And those starting questions would be what time period is my world in? Is my world high fantasy or low fantasy? Is there magic in my world? Is the world civilized or uncivilized? Is the world explored or unexplored? Those are pretty basic questions that just kind of form an idea of the general theme of your world. After you've asked yourself those and you've answered those, these are 5 things that you need to consider as you're going through the world building process and you are fleshing out and defining your world. So, oh man, if I was smart, I could put these tips on the screen. Hold on, here we go. Most people know I don't like editing my videos. I like doing all of these live because editing takes time, and I feel like it's a little bit better if I can give it to you guys the raw shablam zam of what you need to know. Where is that? Right there. All right, number 1 is going to be think of your setting as a character. That's really a weird advice, but when you look at your world not as just a backdrop for what your characters are walking through and what's going on with your story, if you actually think of your setting as an actual character of your story, and you are going to get so much more meat for your story. As far as I guess the easiest example of this would be to give your setting a goal. Give your setting a description. A piece of writer's advice when you are writing a character, normally you want to pick out the 3 most defining things about that character, and those would be the 3 sentences you put on the page of when you're introducing it of oh, Sally had green eyes, she had a wild hat, and she always carried a poodle under her arm. And that if you were to think of your setting as a character, how you would approach that is you'd think of 3 sentences or details that accurately describe your setting as the most prevalent things inside your world. A little example of this that I went ahead and did is I do a campaigns D&D series called the Ilderon Tales. Ilderon is a world that I have built from the ground up. And so if I was to think of Ilderon, the entire world, as a character inside the story I'm telling, how would I describe it? Well, I'd say, Ilderon is a plane where gods walk among their followers. With the activeness of the deities, different individual religions have drastically shaped how the world has evolved. Mortals have become gods in the past, and many aspire to follow their deities' footsteps and ascend beyond their mortal bindings. So right there you have a description of what's the main detail of your world. Then you have a little backstory about it of religion has drastically shaped this world of what has happened in their past. And then you have a goal for that character of just mortals in this world want to follow in their the footsteps of their god to then eventually become a god. So when you have those 3 elements, it's really going to help you get an idea of this world as you're working on all the different aspects of world building. Another thing that helps with this is thinking of your setting as a character. Inside Out did a really good job of just, diving into the mind of a person and like what makes up the mentality of a person, and we can just expand on that a little bit and say what makes up the mentality of a character. And they had this concept in there called core memories. There are these 5 defining thoughts from your life that really shape who you are. Of like when you think on these thoughts, you feel certain things, and those things just help your decision making and how you go about your day and define you as a person. So if you're thinking of your setting as a character, one thing to look at as far as like core memories go would be, I can use our world as an example. Look at how much World War II shaped our society. Look at, if you live in the United States, look at how much 9/11 shaped our society. That is a core memory that's like ingrained inside of, our world's identity that helps, or doesn't help, but it affects everything that develops after that. So think of your world. What core memories shaped your world? Was there like some great benevolent king who everybody loved? Was there like a necromancer that destroyed a bunch of things? Like really dig out your setting as a character. You can even think of your setting as like somebody with PTSD, or if it's a happy place or things like that. It's really going to help in the process of world building, moving along, and you can reflex back to these things. And as long as you have like these elements there, you can always kind of go back to them. And when you're stuck in a process, you can think on these of just like, all right, well, I would want a dragon in my setting. Well, my setting is, a happy place where, dragons helped out in this great war. So dragons are probably, like, this dragon that I'm introducing is probably going to be well-liked. If he's, well-liked, he's not vicious in guarding his treasure. Like, he's probably offering advice or wisdom to people. And that's just like how thinking of your setting as a character can help like shape those decisions. So the next one, number 2, and I'm not going to go through and type on the screen for each one because that's going to take a lot of effort, and this video is going to get longer than it needs to be. All right, number 2, ask why when you place things in your world. This is something you should always keep in consideration in the back of your mind. So asking why is going to lead you to interesting things where if you ever feel lost or you're dragging in the world building process, simply asking why at one thing that you've put in your world can do so much to get your brain kick-started again. So an example of this is, we'll take a classic just D&D fantasy trope of elves live in, this woods. Our elves live in this forest. And you place these elves in your forest and you're in the world, and they're there. Well, why are they there? Why do elves choose to live in the forest in this specific setting? Perhaps, there are trees in this forest that the tree sap from these trees give the elves like their especially long-lived lives. So drinking the sap, helps them live these extravagant long lives, and so they have made their civilization and their society around these trees protecting this forest. Then when you introduce something like that, you can go into another level of asking why, how, and who, what, when, where, all of those other things on those tiny elements of why they're there. So now you have the sap that makes the elves long-lived. Can other people drink it? Oh, if other people can drink it and get the benefits, is anybody else after it? Do they have to protect their forest? Are they at war with other races? Do they handle defending this forest diplomatically? Has anyone ever taken this sap before? And that can be, just elements of like asking why, how it can lead to some great thoughts that can trigger like some just more wonderful moments of detail that you can add to your world. Another one we can do on this is another common example. Well, here's a city and this noble family lives in this city. and going into the why of just like, well, why are they noble? You know, do they have a lineage of ruling the city, or are they noble just because they're rich? Oh, they're rich? Okay, well, how did they earn their fortune? Oh, they were selling horses or selling livestock? Okay, well, why did that livestock, the selling of livestock, land them so much more money than like a simple farmer or something like that? Oh, because there are no horses in this region. There was like a horse plague or something. Or perhaps selling livestock in this region, like selling horses. Maybe this army is dependent upon cavalry, this nation for their fighting force. So then the army needs lots of horses, and this family has a way into the government of, you know, selling exactly what they need. And then now you have this whole element of cavaliers and an area to work off of building a military strategy for this nation, just from simply asking, like, why is a noble family rich? Number 3, because if you guys let me, I will dwell on these things forever. Number 3 is don't be afraid of your inspiration. One thing I hear a lot when I talk to people about world building is they're afraid to write their ideas down because they feel that they've been too influenced by the media and shows and books, that the shows they've watched, the books they've read, and the media they've heard. And I always think that that's a weird thing, that, you know, people don't want to be influenced. Like, it's beautiful if you can make art from a vacuum, but at the end of the day, we are a collection of our experiences. Everything that's in your head, every experience you've had is what shapes you, and your inspiration is part of that. So don't be afraid to write down and borrow elements of your inspiration. If you see something you like done well in a world, you can borrow a piece of that element and add your own flavor to it. So how I like to describe this to people is you should think of your story or your world like a carriage, and or even a lumber mill, okay? And on that note, I guess, like on the previous example, like nobles or dragons or even elves would be like the wheels of your carriage. Like, sure, you didn't invent the wheel, but you need the wheel to, you use the wheel in new and interesting ways that makes up a whole new device greater than the sum of its parts, greater than just the wheel. So it's okay to be inspired by something and use elements of that inspiration in your work, because it's the wheels and then it's other interesting pieces that you arrange in an interesting way that creates something like a carriage. And of course, you know, the carriage is a metaphor for your story or your world in this. So don't be afraid of your inspiration. Number 4, something to consider as you're placing things inside of your world is, how does it link to your story? And this is going to be the loosest advice I give on this video, because it's going to differ between how you're exploring your world. So if you're watching this world for world building for a novel, you should be very concerned with this. If a particular element of your world never shows up in your story and is never mentioned in your book, you shouldn't devote that much time other than just writing a single sentence for it in your notes of developing out this element of your world. But if you're prepping for like a D&D campaign, this is when it differs. In my experience, some of the most interesting stories that I've had in D&D come from players accidentally stumbling on little minor Easter eggs and pieces of knowledge that I've left for them in the world, and using that knowledge in ways that I've never anticipated. So whenever you place anything in your world, you should think of the goals of that thing in your world, because world building is going to work in 2 directions. Yes, it's great to write down the history of your world, as far as, you know, everything that's happened, why this is here, and what's that doing. But it's also going to work into the future. So when you think of your setting like a character, your character has a goal, your setting has a goal, and your world is moving towards something. So when you're placing things inside of your world, just like even in minor evil NPC or a bit of knowledge or a prophecy or something like that, you should always consider how that's going to affect the goal of your world moving forward and how your characters can interact with this in such a way that affects the greater scheme of your world. Because it's very easy to look at world building as just one half of there's only the things in the past that I'm creating and giving to, you know, my audience. Everything is eventually, with luck and hope, gonna move forward in your world. So always think of how what you're placing in your world links to the story you're trying to tell. Number 5 is going to be a very simple one, and you know, you guys can say that this one's either a cop-out or you can say it's an actual tip that might help you out. Consistency, 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 consistency. And if you follow the other tips and you're considerate of these other things, this one's going to come easier to you. And what I mean by consistency, not everything in your world needs to line up, but most things in your world do need to line up to make it kind of flesh out. Like, let's say you have a war going on in your world on a continent that, you know, is on the other side of the world, and there's this great hero in your world that helped end this war that's, you know, on the other side of the world. But then also that hero had a child born in this continent and, you know, raised this child over here in this different nation of your world. Well, you can already see how that doesn't line up because that person needs to be in two opposite places at once. So the easiest way to solve this and make sure your consistency is always lining up is you create an overall timeline for your world. And one thing that this helps with is you find the minor elements of, if you put something forward, you find even more interesting stories when things don't line up in your timeline. So let's take that prior example of you have a hero that was reported as being two different places in the world in one instance, and this does not match up to your timeline. Well, you have just found an interesting nugget of world building, because now you have elements that you can build upon it's going to give your story more conflict and more interest. So either now you've seen that this doesn't line up. So to fix this, you can say, well, that's not really their child that, you know, that hero fostered there. It's an imposter that, you know, has just been lying to the world this whole time. Or maybe it wasn't the hero that solved this great war. Or maybe this hero, you know, has discovered some power that has allowed them to transport these great distances. Maybe he had an artifact that let him do it, and now that artifact is lost in the world. But in any case, you want to make sure that your timeline always lines up, and if you find inconsistencies in it, it's on you to come up with some great interesting reason for why those inconsistencies are consistent with your story. That's about all I had for this video. Real quickly, I will recap and go over them for everybody just to make sure, you know, we're all on the same page. So, number 1, you think of your world as you think of your setting as a character. Give it the detailed description of what is the most prevalent things about it, and give it a goal to work towards. Number 2, ask why when you're placing things. If you ever find yourself stuck in a rut of world building, or you feel like something is not interesting enough, ask why it's there, and just keep zooming in with that microscope until you find the interesting detail on it. Number 3, don't be afraid of your inspiration. If something inspires you and it's an element of a world that you like, by all creative rights, you have the right to use a piece of that and build a machine even bigger and greater. Number 4, think about how does it link to your story. Whenever you place something in your world, you need to be thinking about it historically, as how has it shaped your world and how will it shape your world. Number 5, consistency. Create a timeline for your world and make sure things match up. If things don't match up on your timeline, explain why they don't match up, and that will also give the illusion of consistency. I hope that this video has been helpful. Look out for more world world building videos coming from me in the future. I'm Brandon Kennedy. It's been great talking to you guys. If you have any tips that you think are necessary that I probably missed, we only had room for 5, so go ahead and leave them in the description, and maybe we'll tackle 5 more things you need to consider when you're world building in the future. Have a great day, and come back, do the other things.